welcome back to this episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Train Japan. And my special guest today is Ken Shibusawa, who is the president of Shibusawa and Company. Ken, welcome.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you for hosting me in your office.
Thank you for having me at your program.
Yes, no, well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so, Ken, you belong to a very prestigious and very famous family. I'm watching the whole drama on NHK goes for about a year about Shibusawa Eiichi. So you are the great grandson,
right,
I believe, of Shibusawa Eiichi. But we're here to talk about you today.
Okay.
So, you know, you've grown up in a very famous family, but you've actually spent a lot of time out of Japan. Mm-hmm. And I think I read somewhere that your father moved to the States and you went with the family and you went to school there. Yeah. So what age were you when you first went to the States?
Yeah, sure. So I was made in Japan.
Yes.
Like all good things.
Yes. Yes.
But in second grade in elementary school.
Okay.
My father used to work for a bank called Bank of Tokyo.
Right.
Which is part of the Mitsubishi Bank now.
Yeah.
So we got stationed in New York back in 1969 is when I first went.
Right.
But most of my, all of my formal education beyond that is in the United States, all the way through college.
Did you go to Japanese school in the States? Did you have Nihongo Gakko, that type of thing?
No, there were some, but I didn't want to go because Saturday morning was the day for cartoons on TV, and I didn't want to go to school.
Somehow learning kana and kanji.
Yeah, I didn't want to go to school, so. Yeah.
And then you went to high school there? In New York?
Yeah, no. Actually, from fourth grade, we moved to Texas, and
okay.
so my teenage years was in Houston, Texas,
wow,
and then I went to the University of Texas in Austin.
Right. Okay.
Back then, it was a sleepy old, nice town, and now it's kind of a big high tech.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I thought, when I was in college, I could spend the rest of my life here, but it kind of led me other route, but thinking back, that might have been a nice option.
And what did you study at university?
Actually, I was chemical engineering.
Chemical engineering, right.
But I was in the biomedical area, and I figured out in my fourth year that I wasn't fit to be an engineer. so I became a frita.
Okay,
without any job, right? And so I floated back here in Japan in late 1983. So
at that stage, you hadn't really done any education in Japan.
No.
Had you been hitting the kanji hard at home there, or?
Actually, my uncle on my mother's side of the family used to send me manga.
Oh, okay.
Shonen Sunday, Shonen Magazine. So I was just reading that.
Reading the manga. Right?
So my reading was okay.
Mm-hmm.
My listening was okay.
Mm-hmm.
My speaking was not so good.
Right.
And my writing was a disaster.
Right.
Right.
But you've obviously I see you write a lot of articles in Japanese. You speak in Japanese to audiences. You have your own course as part of the things you do with the Rongo to Soroban school of things. So obviously all of that's come together.
Yeah.
So what age are you when you come back to Japan?
So initially, 23?
23.
Yeah, something like that. And
so
then
you get back to Japan, you're 23 years old, you're educated in America. What happens then? What do you do?
You get lost in translation.
Really?
Yeah, because if you think about it, I grew up in Texas, so it was a lot of open space, and there weren't always people in your face, when you're trying to get to somewhere. And so, but actually, it was back in the 80s, and so it's kind of a fun period to be back, and so I had a blast, actually.
But really blast doing what? What were you doing?
Oh, actually, I was in the nonprofit sector. It's called the Japan Center for International Exchange, and this is a NGO that my uncle on my mother's side of the family started, and it's one of the original NGOs in international relations here in Japan from the private sector. And so my uncle Tadashi Yamamoto has done really great work in that area. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2012 or 13. So that was back when everybody wanted to learn about Japan. So they would come, and I'd be sitting in meetings on the side. And for instance, I just remember this one scene where Morita-san from Sony, right? He was the founder of Sony, right? And he was there, and a delegation from I forgot it was this Congress members or whatever, high level people, right? They would come, and Morita-san is going like this, speaking, and I'm going like, I can't understand a single word he's saying. His English was not really.
Oh, he was speaking in English.
Yeah, but everybody was like, taking
Taking
notes,
okay,
and then it figured, okay, so communication is not just about learning a language, speaking fluently, but it's about the passion, and it's about the message, right? And obviously Morita-san had two of those, definitely. So
he did. And so for yourself, how long did you spend in this NGO?
2 years, a little bit less than 2 years, but that was really fun. That was a fun period, but it was an organization that my uncle started, so it was kind of like a one stop. See what's going on, and then I figured I'd go back to business school because I found out there's a thing called business school, and I went back to UCLA in 1986, 1987.
So was this the Haas School at UCLA?
It's called the Anderson now,
Anderson,
but back then it was called the Graduate School of Management.
Right.
And back then, if you were Japanese and if you had an MBA, Wall Street said, come on down.
Come on down, yeah.
And I said, well, investment banks, wow, they pay a lot better than NGOs. so I went from the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, there's a couple of zeros difference there.
To the extreme profit sector. And so most of my latter half of my 20s and 30s, I spent my time in firms like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and in a global macro hedge fund called More Capital, which was back in the 1990s. Hedge funds were sort of the new thing that kind of came into the the financial markets, and nobody knew what they were all about, and I wanted to know more. So I called and said, okay, can I work for you guys? And one thing led to another. I was able to get a job at a firm called More Capital, which is...
So you were in a position, were you an independent operator within a big firm there as a person who generates profits and through revenues, or were you running a team at some stage there? Through your financial...
it's Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan it's a firm. So you're part of the team,
So you didn't have any particular leadership responsibilities at that point?
I guess I did, but it was sort of like it's very flat. It's not like in an investment bank, it's actually there's different cultures of institutions, where Goldman was much more how should I say it nicely in front of the camera, very, very, very profit oriented in a sense, and so. And I figured that's when I figured out one point was like sort of like in the Japanese context or it's like you do the work and you get evaluated and you get paid. That was thinking, but arriving at Goldman and seeing sort of how the people and they're like, oh, okay, you have to make an appeal that you were working, and you have to make an appeal that this is the this was the contribution you made, and that's how you get paid. And so that's
where the bonuses go.
So that was a revelation that as a team leader in an environment like that, you have to really push for the team and saying this team made this much contribution, so we should get this amount of bonus pool, which was something that was. That I didn't have that sort of mentality when I worked at JP Morgan back in those days. It was still a bank back in the day. So
So at what point did you come back to Japan again?
Oh, I was back in Japan. So after business school, basically, so 1980. Well, I spent a year in New York, so 1988.
So you were working for them back here in Japan?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were in New York. So
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was that was the bubble, and so working at a foreign investment bank for a 20-year-old getting sort of salaries that a 20-year shouldn't be getting for the work you're producing, and it was a bubble, so that was kind of
amazing.
It was kind of I guess it was fun. It's a lot of frustrations that you couldn't catch a taxi and everyone's in a hurry, and so I don't really miss it actually in those days.
And so, at what point did you start actually having to be responsible for people and lead them?
Well, I mean, so I had a team, but it wasn't like a department kind of stuff, right? And so, and at the hedge fund, I had a team, but it wasn't like a department. And so I guess when I started my business in 2001, basically.
Right. Okay.
And you know,
So
Greg,
how do we get to that
Greg,
point?
I'm not an organizational guy.
Ah,
So I'm not good at sort of organization, leadership, and that kind of stuff.
Right,
So I'm always tend to be the guy on the outside, kind of poking in.
there you go.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're in a very profit-driven financial sector bubble. Everything's happening. So what made you jump out of that into running your own company?
Oh, I don't know. It was like, I was turning 40, and I was thinking, wow, my life is half over.
Mm-hmm.
What have I done? Kind of that sort of midlife crisis. I don't know if you ever had a midlife crisis.
Had a couple. could be argued I'm still going through the last one. I'm not sure about that, but anyway.
So, and it never occurred to me for me to really start my own business. That wasn't sort of one thing I had in mind, but I had this sort of window, and my children, my first son was just born, so not the financial sort of responsibilities is not that big. So I figured, well, I'll give it a shot for 2 years, and if it doesn't work out, and I'll go knocking on doors for somebody. Please hire me.
So, okay, you've been in the financial sector. You decided to start your own business. What business did you decide
Okay,
was the right
so
fit?
back then, I was working at a hedge fund. The reason why I decided maybe I could start my own business was the fact that for me, I was always on the investing side,
Right.
investing the assets of the fund.
Mm-hmm.
But in the latter 6 months or so, it's a fund, and so you need capital from outside.
Yep.
And so there's a little bit of talk about fundraising
Mm-hmm.
from Japanese institutional investors, and we never got there when I was there. But so I thought, oh,
And you never got there because? You never got there because they were so conservative, or?
oh no, because there's well, it's a hedge fund, and so they were picky about their investors, and basically they had enough. It wasn't really a capital accumulation growth business,
Mm-hmm.
which is the case for a lot of the funds in the industry. It's more like performance based capital expansion, in a sense, So looking from the financing side of a fund or any financial institution, something I never had experience in, but I thought, well, I see. We have to have the money to actually to invest. And so I thought, well, that's something that I could, starting your own business on the asset side, you need basically, like you're saying, you need a team, you need infrastructure and that kind of stuff. But I was thinking maybe raising funds for funds.
Fund of a fund, right.
Well, yeah, I ended up establishing a fund-to-fund with partners on the West Coast, but finance the fundraising side, right, is something that, well, I could start very modestly with a very small staff, office space. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot.
Low risk. Low risk.
So I'll give it a shot.
So how do you go about getting people to join the company? Because as we know, parents want their kids to join, huge Japanese mega companies, safe, secure. Here's a startup.
I mean, it's not. I mean, people that joined my firm when I was starting up is not the kind of people that would go knocking on doors of large Japanese corporations or in investment banks. So it's more like, happen to know this guy kind of stuff. And,
So word of mouth.
Yeah, word of mouth, and introductions and that kind of stuff. So
a very Japanese approach, I would suggest.
well, it's just very small business approach.
Yeah.
It's just like it's
Right.
not,
You know someone who knows someone.
Yeah.
So you start to get people to come on board, and this is probably the first time at your own business.
Yeah.
You got to take care of your family.
Yeah.
They got their families to take
Yeah.
care of.
Yeah.
You don't know if this is going to work or not.
Yeah.
How do you go about giving them a sense of this will work? Don't worry, we'll be good. Stick with me. How do you get around those sorts of
For the people that's working for you.
People that work for you. Yeah.
See, for my own company. Actually, for my own company, there was actually growth because I started in 2000. Well, first couple of years, it was like, well, maybe it's not going to work out, kind of stuff.
Really?
And but
Okay.
around the end of the 2 year sort of mental time period, I was able to have a deal with a fund that financial institution invested in, and so that got me over the initial sort of hurdle. And then after that, I was starting a fund of funds with a partnership with the guys on the West Coast in California, and that was starting to roll. And so for 2008, things were, we were keeping busy and things were getting good. The problem was 2008. 2008 was kind of a thing. And in 2000, from 6, 7, 8, I was starting another company called Commons Asset Management with some partners. So not just by myself, but with some partners. And that was going. And so my initial plan was like, well, this Commons Asset Management is a long-term investment. It's from retail, not from financial institutions that can write big tickets, but retail for, well, I guess in English you would call it dollar cost averaging, putting aside a little money every month for your future.
So when you say retail, you're talking about B2C as a model here.
Yeah.
You're talking about people putting their dough,
people walking on the street, people,
putting
watching
their money into this fund,
yeah,
expecting a return.
Yeah, but long term, it's not like I put in the money now and I want it back tomorrow with 3x or something.
So the dollar cost averaging idea is over the long term, the ups and downs get averaged out, and you come out with a fairly stable return.
Yeah, right. And so and that came from my personal experience of having my family, having a little baby born, and you said, wow, this little baby is going to be an adult someday, and from when that day comes, I wanted to have some, not a war chest, but something to support his her future challenge at that time as an adult, from a little baby, and that's when I started putting aside every month for in his name, and I found out that with dollar cost averaging, when the market goes down, you get to buy more. If it goes down more, you get to buy more, and I thought, wow, this is great. I never thought, I never meant my long career up until then. It was like, you buy something, you go down, you don't feel very good. But with dollar cost average, you're kind of like, wow, this is cool. I don't feel anything. I feel more hopeful for the future in a sense, because
you're buying the assets cheaper.
Yeah, because you're accumulating actually wealth in that sense, right? And so that kind of one thing led to another, and there were other factors, but decided to launch a mutual fund. And back then, I was thinking, a mutual fund is like that's a very boring business, because I was a hedge fund guy, right? But I figured out that okay, there's a guy named Mr. Sawakami who started this fund called Sawakami Fund. This is late 1990s, and he was this pioneer in this area. And I thought, wow, you can be an entrepreneur in the mutual fund business, and that's something that I never imagined. And so and there was a host of couple of other.
So the mutual fund is you're taking in cash, and you're investing on behalf of the investors into different
Japanese companies.
Yeah,
equity.
It could be you're doing property, you're doing shares.
No, equity investment.
Sorry, all equity.
Yeah.
So it's totally equity focused. Right.
Yeah.
And then the return is coming from the results of that investment, right, to the shareholders.
Exactly. Right.
And so, is the company growing by this stage? Do you get to sort of 2008, 15th of September, Lehman shock?
Okay,
suddenly you're all fired. We've got to lock down the hatches here, or is it we're going to hang on? Kind of come out of this?
Okay. So I had two things going, right? My company, Shibusawa company, and a new company called Commons Asset Management going at the same time, right? My company, I had to downsize, like 1-2 years, and like, well, this is not. So my business was actually raising funds for hedge funds, venture capital funds, buyout funds for financial institutions, and that got blown out. It just got blown out. It's like everybody pulled their money. On the other hand, I was starting this long-term investment for retail, which is much. It's like micro, in a sense, almost microfinance from the world I was in a sense, because the tickets is very, very small. But if it's dollar cost averaging, and if people like myself thinking like, well, I want to make profits for me and myself now, but for my children, for my future, my retirement, putting aside, and if you can gather that from, let's say, all over Japan, it'll be sort of it's more of a stock business rather than the annual flow business, And so this was starting, and this was us crashing, right? Initially, I thought this was going to be flying, and I could support this business. But the engine basically blew out when I was trying to take off, basically, right? And so this side was just starting. So this was, in a sense, it was fortunate that the Lehman shock came, because assets went, just became very, very, very cheap, basically, right? And that's when we started the fund in 2009, January, which is almost the very bottom.
But how do you convince people, especially Japanese people who are very conservative from what we see, particularly on investing, to, in the Lehman shock downturn, it looks like it's a global meltdown, it's a major recession, to get people to actually continue to put up cash and tie that cash up, because most people are trying to hold cash, trying to protect themselves. How do you convince them to do that?
Well, I mean, we obviously we started out very modestly. It was we were thinking, on our Excel worksheet, well, we could probably start with like $10 million, start off, and so, but on the very first day, it was like more like $2 million. It was like, and so like you say, we didn't have a big what do you call it? Kanban sign, that's saying, hey, come, we're open for business. Obviously, our marketing cost, we couldn't use. So
how do people know about it? Have to know somebody? Is that how it works?
Well, actually, because the internet was already in place,
right?
And so that was basically it. So it's on the internet, and we do a lot of seminars, all over Japan and that kind of stuff. And back then we didn't have Zoom, so it's like we face-to-face kind of.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Here's the Rongo to Soroban philosophy of your great-great-grandfather was a very enlightened philosophy in terms of capitalism. We talk about enlightened capitalism. And so did that philosophy fit in for you in terms of what you're offering people with this dollar cost averaging, long-term, gradual accumulation of wealth, that there was a nice melding there, and that people could understand, okay, he's representing a philosophy of capitalism that's enlightened, in inverted commas, and so we see the connection here, we see how that works,
right? Well,
and that makes sense to us to trust this gentleman with our money. Is that how it worked, or no connection at all?
Yeah, I don't know if people felt enlightened. That's why they invested. But I didn't think my Longoto Soroban, which is the teachings of my great-great-grandfather, having morality and business in synchronization, in integration. And I was starting to learn about his philosophy when I started my business in 2001 with Shibusawa Company. Commons asset management, it kind of came from a different sort of angle in my sort of mind. But when we were launching the company, a fund manager friend of mine says, "Well, that's what Eiichi was doing, right?" And I was like, "No, it's like he started like 500 companies, and I'm just trying to start this really small company."
Joint stock companies.
Yeah, but what he said basically when he started the first, he was credited for establishing the first bank in Japan, which is a bank. Everybody knows what a bank is, but back in 1873. The word ginko didn't exist, right? And so it was a startup business. And so basically he said a bank is...
Daiichi Kokuritsu Ginko or something?
The Daiichi Kokuritsu Ginko. It's part of the Mizuho group now. But he basically said a bank is like a mighty river. Money that doesn't gather at the bank is like a puddle of water or dripping dewdrop. But if it gathers at a bank and it starts to flow, then there's power and momentum to establish a new economic society. That was sort of the vision he had, right? And if you think about it, well, what we're trying to do at Commons Asset Management was individuals putting aside a little bit of money for their future or their children's future every month. Well, that's a dewdrop.
Yeah.
You know, but if it gathers enough, well, yeah, maybe a mighty river. And so, in hindsight, it kind of merged, but it wasn't like planned. You know.
No. And the people during Lehman, like that asset business just went away.
I'm sorry, what was it?
During Lehman shock, the asset business basically went away, as you said. So those people were retrenched. Were any able to be brought across to the common side, or you just had two separate businesses?
This one was institutional.
Yeah.
And so, and Commons was not.
No.
We have some institutional money that we manage now, but back then it was just retail. So there wasn't any institution that's going to say, "Oh, Shibusawa-san, you started a new fund, long-term investment. Oh, we'll put in $10 million for you." Doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. But having said that, there were individuals that worked at financial institutions, right? Friends of mine, fund managers, or just people that I had became acquainted with in the industry, and they would for themselves on their personal
individually
they would come in, and so.
Okay, so you've had to downsize the staff.
Well, yeah, that's a nice way of saying.
Well, okay, it's a nice way of saying downsize the staff. But then you've got to keep going on the other side.
Yeah.
And how long did it take to sort of rebuild the Shibusawa and Company side of things?
I kind of found my niche in a sense because I was thinking actually my partner in the Shibusawa Company, the fund of funds on the West Coast, as all the money was being pulled out, so we were on Marunouchi, the Nakadori, right? And Chris, my partner back then, says like, well, everything happens for a reason. Like,
Chris is very philosophical.
He's a little bit older than I. He was like 10, 15 years older than I. So he's an experienced guy, right? And so I was thinking, and that kind of stuck with me. So what is this message that's happening as my I'm experiencing this meltdown? And I thought, well, maybe the signal is, well, Shibusawa-san, you should be focusing your attention on Commons Asset Management. And so that's when I figured, well, okay, so I was in alternative investments on this side for a long time. And I figure in that respect, Commons Asset Management was an alternative to what was being offered back then. So, it's basically in the same flow. But I figured, well, okay, I can't trust I can't trust institutions because they'll say, "Oh, Shibusawa-san, you're such a wonderful fund, but sorry, the organization has made a decision."
Well, for them, it's too small in a way, isn't it? The numbers are
basically, this is like you're a great guy, you're a great fund, but we made the organizational decision to pull the plug, right? And that's the way institutions work, right? But for individuals, I figured, well, I was an individual making long-term investments every month, and it didn't bother me that markets went up or down. So I figured, well, this is what in the terminology we use in the finance industry, sticky money. Sticky money, yeah. But basically it's a stock sort of business, right? And so I thought, well, okay, so did the hedge fund stuff, did the buyout fund, did the venture. Okay, let's see where this wave takes me, on the mutual fund side. And then so Shibusawa Company kind of evolved into my sort of what do you call it? Research into my great-great-grandfather's work.
Right.
And so I started, I was writing and making a little bit of public appearances and a little bit back then as well. But so basically, Shibusawa Company right now is a human resource / communications kind of quote consult. But it's my sort of family office basically.
So in that sense, it's a very famous name. I mean, there's a whole 12-month, I guess it's going to be 12 months, I'm not sure now because of COVID, but Shibusawa Eiichi's stories on NHK every Sunday night, 8 o'clock, I watch it. I struggle to understand the Japanese, but I do my best. I actually have the kanji on screen to try and read what the hell's going on. But it's got tremendous profile, but he's always had tremendous profile. And it's a big family, it's a big family. So is it the first time that somebody within the family has tried to do something with that heritage, or is this just this generation's doing something with their heritage? Were there people in your family, your grandfathers or whatever, granduncles, who were doing something with the Shibusawa name or not? You're really the first one to go back and say, okay, let's get out there and talk about the philosophy. Let's go out there and talk about the man.
Yeah, in that respect, I think certainly I think in my generation, which is the fifth generation, that kind of I don't, especially on their own, kind of hanging there, you know. I don't know any other person, and that's one of the reasons I figured, well, nobody else is doing it. Why not?
Why not?
Kind of.
And so, do you need to get sort of family sign off on something like that, or you can do it independently, or how does that?
Well,
work?
I mean, it's everything's for public knowledge.
Right.
You know, so it's not like this secret sort of vault you go in and
no. So also, you know, you mentioned to me for 13 years. You've been giving these lectures that go for a whole year. It's a year program, I think.
It's not really a lecture, but it's more like a discussion workshop.
Discussion workshop, sorry. And talking about the philosophy.
Yeah.
So is that a type of recruiting ground for people to think about investing for the future for the mutual fund, or was that done for a separate purpose? Or
it's well, I mean, you know, I figure if we get to know each other and if they like the mutual fund, so you know, please come. But it wasn't sort of a feeder for marketing for the mutual fund. It's
right. Okay.
So to me the two businesses is not mutually exclusive. It's just sort of it's in the same. So it's kind of layers of same thing.
But it's incredibly reasonable what you charge. I look on your website and I go, wow, that's unbelievable. This period of time, for this cost for the value is incredible. So it felt to me like, oh, this is not to make money per se. This has got another purpose here. Am I wrong in that?
Yeah, well, I figure, if you're targeting, let's say, corporate clientele only, then there's that sort of pricing range, right? But for me, it was something like, well, if I was an individual not being sponsored by a corporation, how much would I be willing to pay for something like this? And I figured, well, I'd be willing to pay for something like this. So that was just based on that. So, and I've just been running with it with no inflation adjusted for the last 13 years. Because it's been deflationary.
It's been deflation, right? No inflation, right. So, if we think about, you've now got a team, you're running a team. What have been some of the challenges that you've found in running teams in Japan?
It's any team. I think it's more about the inner communication. I think. And
when you say that, I mean that's a broad term. What does it actually mean?
Well, because in Japan, we talk about. I'm sure you have this, KY kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Kukyumenai, and it's like it's like sort of this ambiance sort of understanding of people, and and Japanese society has always had that sort of thing, which basically says you're not so direct with the wording sometimes. You're supposed to learn by observing, feel, but not think, kind of that kind of thing.
But you've grown up in a Western culture, educated in America, so you come back to Japan as an adult. So how did you feel about that? I mean, this sort of Western logic, the brain, and you've got this Japanese, which is more intuitive, emotional. How did that sort of work itself out?
It's just a mishmash. I don't. It's sometimes. I mean, it's just a mishmash because So I don't come in thinking like, oh, I have this Western sort of perspective and we should do it that way. Rather, but I think any person that sort of spends not so much Western, Eastern, Japanese, or American, that kind of stuff, but just having the opportunity or having a change of environment for where you were, like Greg, so you've been in Japan for quite a while, and so I'm sure your sort of thinking right now it would have been different if you stayed in your home, Australia, is it? And I think and I don't think everybody needs to do that in a society or organization, but I think you probably need maybe 10, 15, 20% sort of the people that sort of like think, I guess the terminology, think out of the box kind of thing. I think you need that in any organization. So you don't for a team organization to have like-minded people. That's a disaster, I think. Because you only see
Which is sort of interesting because Japan's educational system, the sort of classic is that at 11:15 on Monday, everyone's doing mathematics, type of thing. Very standardised, very regimented, very rote learning oriented. Not much on the creativity side. I went to Georgie. I studied at Georgie, and I was so shocked. I'd graduated from university in Australia, did modern Asian studies at Griffith, came to Japan on a Monbusho scholarship. I started staying in Georgie, and it was just totally different to what I imagined. And the students were very passive, and they were not engaged in the classes. They were not engaging with the sensei, with the professor. And it was just the sensei would do a monologue during the lecture, and then he'd do a monologue during the zemi, the tutorial. And I thought, well, where's the interaction here? Where's the intellectual pursuit, And there was nothing going on there. And then when you get into companies, it's okay, this is how we do things around here. Your job is to learn that and fit in with this. Don't rock the boat, or you'll be gone, because only your boat rockers here. Nail that sticks out, it's going to get hammered down. Don't be one of those. So you fit in. So through, some sort of cradle right through, you're encouraged to fit in. But as you say, if you're all thinking the same, then where's the different way of thinking? If you do the same things in the same way, you get the same results. If you want a different result, you either do something new or do something old in a new way. It all represents change. But people are not so keen about change anywhere, particularly in Japan. So how do you encourage people to think out of the box?
Well, I think when your environment changes. It's basically that's. I mean, if you're in the same environment, if you're in your greenhouse, why change? But when you figure out, ooh, it's cold out there, or it's hot, or there's a nice wind, different switches come on. But if you're in the same environment all the time, the same switches are on and off, and so I think a lot of what we see and hear about sort of the problems with Japan was this model that was super successful after the war in the Showa later half of the Showa period, when there was the background growth, and you can do the same thing, you can have the hierarchy, and everybody was happy. But now, in the last 30 years, we're thinking like, well, I guess things are a little bit different.
This is the lost decade that's actually now in its 30th year. Totally, So what you're saying then is that the leader creates the environment that then triggers the creativity.
And I think we should be, I think we should be sensitive to the fact that actually the corporate management mentality in Japan has changed tremendously in the last 30 years.
How do you see that?
Because people figured out, we're not going to have this growth forever, and so they see issues that they need to revitalize like you say, having everybody being the same had its merits when there was growth, right? Because you're part of a machine and you wanted to move it very, efficiently. You don't want, you want everything to fit in place. But when you lose that growth, well, you need to find new growth. You need to find new ideas. Well, guess what? You need different, stimuli coming in, and they get it. I mean, I can state this that leadership, corporate in Japan get that. They get that. But the problem is, the structure of the corporation is still Showa. In a sense, it's. And there's no things lifetime employment, but they call it shushin koyo, and there's a hierarchy kind of by and that model fit that era great, but it doesn't fit. And right now with millennials and the Z theory, not theory Z, it's the Z generation. There's a lot less people. And guess what? They have their choice and like, well, I want to work for this company. Right. I don't want to work for that company. Right?
Particularly with the declining population, where in the last 20 years, the youth population from basically 18 to 34 is halved, and it's going to keep halving over the next 40 years. So the pool of young Japanese who are available to us as employers is really contracting. So I think this is the generation that have the whip hand, so to speak, of who I choose to work for is very much in my interests. rather than me having to conform.
And the thing
to
is,
you.
they have the information on their fingertips.
Yeah.
Because they're the digital native, right?
Yes,
and so
yes.
they see the alternative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for corporations saying like, oh, well, you're a wonderful person, we're a wonderful company, you have to wait 30 years before you have any responsibility.
Yeah.
And for some people that works,
Mm-hmm.
right? But for the people that really want to drive the creativity and growth and value for a company, they're kind of like, well, 30 years? That's a long time to wait. And so the standing, apparently, not joke, but reality for the top universities, top departments, like in engineering, is like, they're like, oh, you're going to that corporation? So it's like the top cream is like they're thinking really way out of the box and thinking starting your own business or something else, and going to the bureaucracy or large corporations like, oh, okay. it's kind of like,
what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?
For the top bill, I'm talking about the top sort of guys, right? And so that's changed a lot, right? And so the corporations need to be aware of that. They're like, okay, we need to make an effort to hire the best young talent. Everybody says that in every generation, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at the organization, the way it's structured, it's like, well, we can't welcome these people. You talk about leadership, and you're kind of like, well, you have to wait 30 years for that, and it's like, well, for some people, that's not going to work.
Well, it's the HR role too. I mean, in the West, the concept of HR as a partner, as a driver of the business, has been well established for a long time. And so people don't fear HR. But still in Japan, HR is sort of policeman. You were late for work, you took an extra hour off at lunch. We're going to send you to the middle of nowhere because you didn't behave or something, or you made a mistake, and write that down. So the idea of HR as a driver of people's careers is still not well established here. So I can imagine for some people thinking, well, no, I don't want to be subject to that environment. I want to have more control over my career.
I was really surprised, like it was about a month ago, for front page news on the Nikkei saying a large established company established a policy where the employee can say no to an assignment.
Right.
I'm thinking like
Really?
it's like,
never heard of it.
Really? It's like you can't say no to an assignment. And it's like, and apparently under Japanese law, you don't get laid off very often in Japan. But one of the reasons for being laid off is if you refuse an assignment. And I think like, wow. I mean, like growing up in the sort of the foreign financial institutions, like there's lots of I think we should go there because of that, and there's lots of sort of negotiation about that, But for a Japanese corporation, you get handed that paper, and you're like, arigatou gozaimasu.
Yeah.
It's like wow, and that made the front page of the Nikkei. I was like, well, that's kind of, I felt that was kind of weird, and I thought, I didn't think we're in that era still, So
But obviously we are. We're changing. And so for you, in terms of, we often talk about trust in Japan is I think, a really critical factor. I mean, trust is important everywhere, but I think Japan sort of takes it to another level of height because this is a culture of no defects, no errors, loyalty. And even though as a foreigner, initially you think Japanese are very robotic and not emotional, until you get to know Japanese, you find out how absolutely...
a couple of beers and then...
just how emotional, like the decision-making is very emotional. Like you said before.
Yeah.
People joined your company making an emotional connection through someone they knew who recommended you as an employer. That's not a logical sequence necessarily. It's an emotional sequence. And so, this trust is sort of the guardian blanket of all of that emotionality, that you can make those emotional choices in a safe environment. So what do you do with your teams, or what have you seen works with teams to create that greater sense of trust between the leadership and the led? Well,
I mean, it's kind of a common phrase that is used these days, but sharing that common purpose. I mean, if it's just the financial motivations, there's always other places that can provide better financial, rewards. But if the members share a common purpose for doing something.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So there's a common purpose here, helping the little guy and gal to have financial security for the future. Is it to take very profound teachings, combining Confucian ideology around proper behaviour, and then also the commercial side of it, the mercantile side of things, and putting them together to have an enlightened capitalist view on things? Is it that? Is it both? How does that?
Well, I mean, you threw me sort of a question that there's Commons Asset Management Company, there's my company, and there's a lot of other organizations I'm involved in, and so it depends on the organization. So it's not one, but I think that organization, whether if it's Commons Asset Management, our purpose is to have long-term value creation for the next generation. That's basically the purpose.
And is that the driving purpose for the team?
And if the team doesn't share that vision or that purpose, certainly they can get a better job, a higher paying job somewhere else. Right. I mean, certainly, but
obviously it's fulfilling enough.
Yeah, and it's also it's still been existing 13 years, I guess, but still it's still a growing company, and we're always short of staff, which means there's always things to do, and keeping yourself busy. And
you're short of staff because you're losing people or because you're growing?
I'm sorry.
Are you short of staff because you're losing people to higher opportunities, or because you're growing?
Because we're growing, but in a sense to pay them, frankly. It's not a leveraged kind of business. So it's a stock building business, as I mentioned. And so once the stock is being made, you can add staff, but otherwise it was always eating away at the capital. And so we had to repeat lots of fundraising for the company.
Keep going.
Yeah. So, but I think for kind of sharing the common purposes kind of sounds like a good sort of nice way to do it. But another thing, basically, I think that keeps teams together is the sense of growth. Frankly, I mean, so if you're joining a venture startup, why do you join? Because you think there's that growth, and you might, for the experience, you might make good money, possibility, that kind, and it's just fun to be in a growing environment. And so when there's that growth, people's purposes tend to be more common. But when you start losing that growth, that's when people that actually don't have that common purpose, it sort of start fall apart.
And what about with COVID? Because we're a training company. It's been devastating for face-to-face. We're doing everything online now, but it's a different reality. It's harder.
Yeah.
And so it's not a time of growth for most of us now. It's a time of survival to hopefully come out of this. So a lot of my communication is, we're going to come out of this. We're going to make it. Hang in there. Right. It's tough, it's hard, but we're going to make it. How about the communication and messaging that you're giving to your team?
Well, actually, for Commons, we're growing. So with COVID, with COVID, you figure, well, with COVID, I think there's some things that has to change because it's changing environment, but there's some things don't change, and one would be that if your purpose is changing because of the change in environment, that's probably not the right purpose, right? Right, and so that's the mess. I mean, that's the message is that the purpose is here. Are you guys on board or not? That's the only thing, right? And so if the person working for that organization says, well, yeah, I like the purpose, but I just need to pay the bills and support the family, and this other firm is giving me a better opportunity, well, it's
a logical choice.
Yeah.
If you're giving some advice to someone who's being sent to Japan, who has been sent here, and they're now responsible to lead a Japanese team, what would be some advice you'd give them?
I think Western way of thinking is goal setting, leadership. What's some other word? Those kind of words, and those are very important words.
KPIs,
those kind of words.
management by objectives, etc.
There's a goal set, and everybody says this is the goal, and so okay, we'll figure out a way to get to that goal, kind of stuff. In Japanese mentality, they kind of like, well, we want to make sure that we reach that goal, so we don't want to overstretch, we don't want to understretch. So it's more like building blocks from this, rather than saying this is the direction. I think very typical here. Very, it's of course there's different kinds of personalities in management and in organizations, but I think it's Japanese mentality tends to be more process oriented rather than goal oriented. So people want to make sure they're doing it the right way. So look at the way the vaccine's being rolled out.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous, right?
Very slow.
because
very safe, maybe.
Because like everybody thinking like, oh, we have to make sure the process is right. No double counting. And that kind of stuff. Like, making sure that there's no, that the personnel that's giving the vaccines are registered and that. And kind of like, well, yeah, it's true. The process is very important in normal times, but man, when you just get it in, basically, right? And but that kind of mentality. Is sort of in Japan.
So how do you lead that? Because you've got headquarters back in the States, like your example before about the profit, drive is very strong in some companies, and you're sent out to Japan usually to fix a problem.
Yeah.
And people have expectations about how Japan's income is going to improve with you there. And you've got a Japanese workforce who've got a sort of more of a process-driven orientation rather than an outcome-driven orientation, and you're in the middle between headquarters and the Japanese team. How do you provide the results and keep the Japanese team motivated?
Well, that how is up to that individual. That's why he's getting paid that money.
Right. Okay.
Right. Okay. But what he needs to do, how, I mean, I don't know how it's up. What he needs to do is being the translator, right? Be between the headquarters demands and the local demands. Headquarters demands, they're far away, so it tends to be more digital demands, right? So you can transmit the data far away. Local demands tend to be more analog, like I can't get along with that guy, that kind of stuff, right? And so, and what's a manager or leader in your discussion? Somebody that can translate between two different things, right?
Right, so they can bridge.
Yeah.
So what are some other things you'd advise people to think about their leading a team in Japan?
Be sensitive to the person, or there's always a person in the crowd that actually is not vocal but is really thinking about a lot of stuff. He should be more vocal. He or she should be more vocal in terms of putting input into a process. But some people are not that way, and there are actually lots of talent in people that in the sort of the quote the Western sort of perspective doesn't seem to be up to speed, but in fact is actually a core. And so it's like for any team though, I think to be it, if you fine tune it for efficiency, it'll probably break down.
Right.
Because some environment change, something will change, and if it's moving efficiently, it'll just break down. So you always need this sort of mishmash, analogic kind of thing. The thing I love this analogy about this ants. Where like if you take away 20% of the working ants, the remaining, the 20% starts working. But if you just take away the 20 working ants and put in one, like 20% will work and the rest won't work. We've seen that experiment?
No.
It's kind of this 20-80 rule, right? Where the 20% does most of the work, 20% doesn't then do anything, and 60% just sort of like and it's a great classic kind of organizational kind of stuff. And what happens is in sort of any sort of organic sort of group, you take away the top performers, and guess what? The remaining guys, the non-performers, tend to perform. If you just bring in the top performers together, there always be guys that sort of like start slacking, and
so those guys.
Yeah. I thought that's a great.
Pick up the pace.
Yeah. So, but I got a little bit off of your subject, but I'm thinking like if you think you come to an organization and saying, especially in Japan, saying like everybody should be a top performer, it just doesn't work that way. I think.
Should they learn Japanese? People who are coming here for a couple of years, think they should study Japanese.
Sure. Yeah. The reason why is like at least it shows the local staff that this guy has some commitment to Japan, which is important, right? So if he thinks this guy's here 2 years, gets it on his resume, and is back.
Which a lot of the time is exactly the case.
Yeah,
and
for
a lot of Japanese staff who've seen this before, it's like, oh, here's the latest version.
Yeah.
They'll be around for 3 years, and then they'll be gone.
And obviously, everybody would be polite to him. He's the boss. But is he? Are they really opening up their sort of what they really think about? I mean, people are people, right? So if you think the other person has an interest in you, you'll show interest in them, kind of stuff.
So language is important.
I'm sorry, you don't have to speak perfect English or Japanese, because this is so funny about Japan. Is like if you, Greg, come up and start talking to me in perfect Japanese. And I'm okay kind of stuff, but for so many people, they're like, wow, it's like, wow, where did this guy come from? They can't get a little bit suspicious, right?
A certain generation, I think that's still the case. Although today, I mean, you see so many foreigners on TV speaking absolutely perfect Japanese. So the sort of
but without a hint of accent, and that kind of stuff, and you think like,
perfect.
Where did this guy come from? It's like, but if you speak broken Japanese, they're like, oh, Story-san, 日本語上手ですね.
That'd be me. I'll be in the non-perfect Japanese side of things, but still trying. Well, Ken, thank you very much. I know you're an extremely busy man, and thank you for sharing your thoughts today.
Sure.
Any things you want to say about the program you're running for people to learn about your great-grandfather's philosophy?
Well, I mean, it's sorry, it's in Japanese, so that. But basically, not my sort of hope for this new era that I think we're entering a new era in Japan. And in the past, it was made in Japan. That was a big brand, and Japan did such a successful job that we got bashed. So the next period of it, you call it the lost decade, but I think it was sort of like the decades of destruction, where the old norms basically got reset in the last 30 years. And so basically that model went from, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I'll make it in your country, made by Japan, that kind of model. Made in Japan became made by Japan. And from 2020, what's happening is we're going to be going to this really severe reverse pyramid aging society, which means it's going to be a huge demographic shift that Japan hasn't seen probably ever in this scope, scale, speed. But for that, there's lots of difficulties for Japan going forward. But a changing environment, social demographic environment, means there's new opportunities, I think, in a sense, a new way of thinking about things. And frankly, the guys and gals in their 30s, 20s, and 10s are the digital native, right? They're connected. They can be connected at any time, any point. And so I'm hoping for the new generation, the new model for Japan would be not just made in Japan, not just made by Japan, but made with Japan.
Right.
Let's think about sustainable issues, economic issues, environmental issues. Social issues, and let's work with us to make a sustainable, prosperous world, co-creation, and that kind of mentality, I think, actually fits with the Japanese psyche in a sense, rather than I'll lead you to this new frontier kind of
more cooperative.
So I'm hoping this "made with Japan" will be a recognized word, looking back 30 years from now.
All right. Okay. Well, all right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us for this latest episode of Japan's top business interviews. Look forward to seeing you next week.